The Sunday school lessons for April the 6th, 2025 are Christ's once for all sacrifice and it only takes one. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 23 through 28, chapter 10, verses 1 through 4, verses 11 through 14, and verses 19 through 25. Welcome, viewers and subscribers, to my channel, Read With Me. If you are new here, please know that this is an audio reading of the lesson with intermittent commentary. Verse 23, it was necessary then for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. The word then indicates that the writer is moving from establishing facts of Christ's blood atonement, the what so, to exploring the implications of those facts, the so what. The phrase copies of the heavenly things refers to things of earth with counterparts in heaven. The need to use animal blood to purify various elements of the Old Testament worship structures seems clear in Leviticus chapter 16, verses 15 through 19. But the second half of the verse at hand tells us that the necessary also applies to the heavenly things themselves. But if nothing sinful has come into contact with those heavenly things, why the need for purification? Some students see a lesser to the greater logical argument as the solution. Such an argument says that if something is true for a thing of lesser importance, it must also be true for a thing of greater importance. The next verse provides insight into the author's assertion regarding the need to purify the heavenly things. Verse 24. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands that was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself, now to appear for us in God's presence. In verse 24, the word for implies that what follows explains or expands on the previous statement. Mortal high priests enter into a sanctuary made by human hands. Christ, on the other hand, entered heaven itself at his ascension. There, he performed his priestly duties in the heavenly tabernacle, not in the replica on earth. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 12. The author emphasizes a distinctive feature of Christ's heavenly ministry. The present tense now points to Christ's ongoing role in interceding for believers. Contrary to mortal priests who repeatedly offer sacrifices, Christ's single sacrifice has eternally settled the sin debt. In this role, Jesus stands directly before God without any veil separating him from the Father, conducting his priestly duties on our behalf. Verse 25, nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again. The way the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood that is not his own. This verse compares how Jesus' service differs from mortal high priests. The law of Moses prescribes an annual day of atonement for addressing the people's sins. 2 goats were chosen, one for sacrifice to atone for sins, and one for release unto the wilderness as a scapegoat to carry off sins. On the Day of Atonement, and only on that day, the high priest would enter the most holy place to set these procedures in motion. This backdrop sets the stage for a greater contrast next. Verse 26, otherwise, Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world, but he has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away with sin by sacrifice of himself. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 27 makes much the same point that we see here. Both passages emphasize the uniqueness of Jesus' self-sacrifice. Rather than suffering many times, his sacrifice was one time only. That's one reason it is superior to the sacrifices of mortal high priests. If his sacrifice were only as effective as that of animals, he would have had to die repeatedly since the creation of the world. The Apostle Paul makes the same point. Christ's sacrificial death marks the transition from one era of history to another. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. Verses 27 through 28. Just as people are destined to die once, and after that to face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. The death sentence that all humans labor under was pronounced in Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. The writer's phrase, to die once, refers to physical death. There are some notable exceptions in that a handful of people in the Bible died twice physically. Those whom Christ raised from the dead during his earthly ministry died again later. Contrary to humans who were destined to die once, Jesus voluntarily sacrificed his life to settle the debt of sin. His death was a conscious act of self-sacrifice. The phrase after that sets the possibility of another death as a result of the judgment to come. No one will be exempt from this evaluation. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. The result will be an eternal separation of forgiven sinners from unforgiven sinners. Some students propose that the two verses before us mean a person is judged immediately after death. Others disagree. The author does not specify when the judgment occurs. The emphasis is on the fact that our once death sentence stands in parallel with Christ's once offered sacrifice to take away the sins of the world. His return then will not be for paying for sins again, but for bringing in the promised salvation. Philippians chapter 3, verse 20, and Titus chapter 2, verse 13. Chapter 10, verse 1. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. The author of Hebrews continues to compare and contrast the realities of the Old Covenant with those of the New Covenant. Having shown the superiority of Christ's priesthood, the author explains the superiority of Christ's sacrifice to animal sacrifices. The phrase, the law, refers to the law of Moses in this context, not law in general. Nothing was wrong with the law of Moses regarding what it was intended to achieve. Its holy value is in the facts that 1, God was its ultimate author, and 2, as a shadow of the good things that are coming. The law points to certain future greater realities. Those who accepted the first fact while missing the second fact were in danger of putting an unrealistic burden on others. The New Testament authors recognized the law's limited and distinct role in God's plan. The law was a temporary guardian meant to lead us to Christ. The law's intended role means that it cannot make perfect those who draw near, since no one has kept the law perfectly. No one, that is, except for Christ. Verse 2. Otherwise, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worshippers would have been cleansed once for all, and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. The word otherwise introduces a logical conclusion to the current argument regarding the limitations of the law of Moses. Were the law of Moses to have been God's final word to humanity, God would not have settled the sin issue once and for all. The animal sacrifices would need to continue forever, and since such sacrifices would need to be repeated indefinitely, they do not have the power to perfect God's people. Paul makes a similar argument about the law in Galatians chapter 3 verse 21, where he denies that righteousness comes through the law because God did not give a law capable of imparting eternal life. Verses 3 through 4. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Verse 3. Instead of freeing the people from their guilt, the animal sacrifices of the law of Moses had opposite effect. They were an annual reminder of sins. The sacrifices highlighted sinfulness rather than fixing the problem of sinful hearts again. In verse 4, we see that this verse highlights the main limitation of animal sacrifices. Given that God commanded the animal sacrifices, it may seem strange that the author of Hebrews denies that they take away sins. After all, do not Leviticus 16 and 10 and Numbers 29 and 11 say that the two goats make atonement? But notice again their temporary nature is wash, rinse, repeat indefinitely. Verse 11. Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. The author continues to draw together the threads of the argument. He does so here by first describing the duties of every priest. Under the Old Covenant, a priest's work was never done. He would perform the same rituals and sacrifices repeatedly. The blood offerings he would make were categorized in various ways: the sin offering, the guilt offering, the burnt offering, and the fellowship offering. The bloodless offerings were the grain offering and the drink offering. None of these rituals or sacrifices could ultimately remove the people's sins. The contrast comes next. Verses 12 through 13. But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. And since that time, he waits for his enemies to be made his footstool. Verse 12. By contrast, Christ's priestly service required only a single offering, himself. He offered this sacrifice one time for the sins of humanity. At that point, his duties were completed, and he took his rightful seat at God's right hand. The writer of Hebrews draws on Psalm 110, verse 1, to affirm Jesus in this position. By the time we get to this point in the book of Hebrews, the writer has already pointed to this psalm 3 times. The use here implies that the Son's sacrifice is completely satisfactory, never needing to be repeated. He will remain seated until the second coming. In verse 13, we see that this verse continues the quotation of Psalm 110 and 1. The idea seems to be one of rest now that Christ's work on the cross is completed. He offers no more sacrifices. Instead, he accompanies a seat of honor while his Father works to make every knee bow to Christ and every tongue confess that he is Lord. Verse 14. For by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. This verse concludes the argument that the author has been making. The numerous animal sacrifices of the Old Covenant have given way to Christ's one sacrifice. This is the offering by which people may be made perfect, not by the animal sacrifices of the law of Moses. The people being perfected by Christ are also referred to as those who are being made holy. To be made holy or set apart is to be sanctified, and there are two aspects to this. Verses 19 through 22. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is, his body, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Verse 19 tells us that our last section sketches the implications of Jesus' priestly work. According to Leviticus chapter 16, only the high priest could enter the most holy place, the dwelling place of God's presence in the tabernacle and temple. This access was only allowed once a year. Because Jesus' sacrifice completely satisfied the penalty for sin that we owed, we can each have access to God that was unthinkable before. Regarding the confidence that we now have to enter the most holy place, we also see chapter 10 verse 35 and 1 John chapter 5 verse 14. In verse 20, the new and living way distinguishes the new covenant from the old one. This way is new because it was inaccessible before Christ offered himself as a sacrifice. This way is also living, which means it gives life to those who follow it. By his self sacrifice, Jesus has opened a path for us through the curtain of his body. When his body was torn to death by nails on the cross, the curtain in the temple was torn at the same time. Matthew chapter 27, verse 51. The link becomes more evident if the veil is understood not as a barrier, but as the threshold that separated the most holy place from the outer world. Similarly, Christ's body broken on our behalf is the door that leads into God's presence. John chapter 14, verse 6. Verse 21. The author provides a statement of fact that gives the reason for the imperative of the next verse. Before we go there, however, we take a minute to examine the designation, the house of God. This was the title for the Jerusalem temple, especially after the return from the Babylonian exile. But the author of Hebrews uses the designation to refer to people who constitute the church. Verse 22. This is the resulting imperative. This is what we are to do with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, an imperative echoed in various ways elsewhere. The imagery of hearts sprinkled and bodies washed may have its basis in Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 25. See also the image of sprinkled blood in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 24, and cleansing in 9 and 14. The inner cleansing of the heart is matched also by the outer cleansing with pure water, which likely refers to baptism. The Greek word translated conscience occurs 30 times in the New Testament. The word occurs in a positive sense. Our conscience was given to us by God to be a moral guide, but humans are adept at modifying their conscious evil. Verses 23 through 25. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Verse 23. The verb hold unswervingly denotes consistency in adhering to the professed faith. The ability of God's people to be faithful is based on God's faithfulness to uphold his promises. His faithfulness is beyond question. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 9, Hebrews chapter 3 verse 6. In verses 24 through 25, these two verses are logically connected. Think about it. Wouldn't it be almost impossible to encourage one another on toward love and good deeds unless we are in the habit of meeting together? That's the context of supporting each other. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. Thank you so very much for listening. Join me soon for the next reading of the Sunday School lesson with intermittent commentary.